Well, Higher Education Minister Blade Nzimande has warned that student debt could have serious implications for the sector's future. It comes as students are now racing to register, others also trying to squeeze in those last-minute applications, even for funding. This for students, that's the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Those students have been told, who've been successful, that they will not have to pay a registration fee in order to enroll at a university for 2023. The South African Students' Congress President Vezinhlanhla Simelane is with me now in studio. I don't know why that suddenly became a tongue twister. Good to see you, Vezinhlanhla. 16.5 billion rand is the new figure for student debt as per Minister Nzimande's address yesterday. How do we bring it down?
No, thanks, my brother. I think as South African Student Congress, we have always raised our views that government alone cannot be able to fund higher education, because you know very well that at the end, people who benefit from us being graduates, not only government, it's also private sector. So private sector, we believe that it must also contribute in terms of funding the sector. And at the same time, since we have this debt now, we think that government must find ways in terms of how can they reduce the debt. At the same time, the private sector as well must also be encouraged to play a critical role on that.
How should the private sector play a role? What would you like them to do? Because a lot of companies, I know it's not all of them, but some do run bursary schemes and the rest of it. Why is that not enough?
It's not enough because if there's a significant contribution that they're doing, we'll be able to see it. But there's not a significant contribution. So people who must be able to run that project as well, it's government, so that at least at the end of the day, there is an account in terms of how long private sector has gone in assisting in this regard. I think another point that you need to make is that there must be a thorough investigation in terms of this debt, because sometimes universities, they can raise things that were never existed. So we need our department to at least have some kind of an investigation. How did we get to this debt?
What I'm trying to understand is if you, as the Congress, have worked out the way in which you would like the private sector to contribute more significantly. What is that? Should they maybe create a fund where they each have to basically make a certain contribution? Would it be through taxation?
Of course, we have also raised the issue of a sin tax, that, there are companies that must be able to at least provide what you call a sin tax. SASCO has always called for that. And as I've said earlier on, we think that government must be at the center of that. There must be a certain arrangement where at least we're saying we're encouraging private sector to contribute in this regard. In that regard, we know that at least a year, if a private sector companies have been able to produce or contribute R1 billion, for instance, then we can take society to confidence that at least there's something that the private sector is playing in that regard, because they can't just contribute individually. And if that is what they are doing, there won't be some kind of a paper trail to say this is how much they have gone. But government on their own must be at the center of that, encourage private sector to channel the resources to one arrangement. And also on the question of, like we've always encouraged government to say, all departments of our government must channel monies of higher education to one department. They must not allow individual department to contribute on education, because on that on its own, what does it does? It separates the monies in terms of how government should be able to control that. There must be one center where they should be accountable for those resources.
I hear you on that. So almost 10 years ago, we all remember the historic Fees Must Fall demonstrations. That led to some advances as far as the inclusion or better accommodation of the so-called missing middle students. These are people who, on paper, are quote-unquote too poor for NSFAS funding. No, well, families earn too much for NSFAS funding, but also are too poor, for example, to approach a financial institution to get a student loan, right? But at the core of that has been that still unanswered call for free higher education. Do you think that's moved further out of reach?
In our view as SASCO, after Fees Must Fall, there was a declaration, of course, of free education in higher education. And that has been the call of SASCO since the inception of SASCO. And we do welcome that. But again, we've raised issues that, for instance, the threshold of 350 per annum is not enough. In our society, we've got petrol that is increasing, everything is increasing. So the standard of living is increasing as well. So we have urged our government that at least they must look into increasing 350 to 600,000 per annum, so that if we are able to do that, the missing middle question will be able to address. And we do hope that at some point they'll be able to listen to us, because let me tell you, my brother, there are people who are earning just after 350,000 per annum, and their kids are unable to apply for NSFAS because their parents are earning more than 350,000 per annum. And in that regard, I know that NSFAS, they've said they must do appeals and stuff like that. You know, it's a serious factor, because just after 350, you're no longer qualifying to have NSFAS.
So if you make 352,000, for example, it's a disqualification.
It's a disqualification, but at the same time, they're saying we must do appeals and stuff like that. But you're saying, to at least fundamentally address this question, there must be an increase from 350 to 600.
Okay. Final question. If all of that does not happen, do you think we are, as a country, at risk of seeing something similar to fees must fall?
You know, if you recall, I think for the past 2 years, last year and that other year, there has been an issue in terms of missing middle. Mostly NSFAS issues are gradually being addressed. For instance, this time around, you know that everyone who qualifies for NSFAS will be able to register. And we must always appreciate that. The only problem that we're going to have, and we had it last year, is the question of missing middle. And that is the reason that made us, even as SASCO, to call for a mass demonstration to say we're going to force our universities and government to ensure that they find a way in terms of how can they best assist those ones who are falling in the missing middle process.
Vezinhlanhla Simelane, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you very much.